Merry Christmas, everyone! False Swipe Gaming is celebrating the holidays with an old duo of ice types. So old, in fact, they're literally prehistoric. Piloswine's been with us since GSC, then in Gen 4 it evolved into Mamoswine, after reaching a certain level while also knowing ancient power. These imposing Pokemon truly live up to the term mammoth, with their heaving bulk and massive power. True to their extinct inspiration, these two belong to the ice type, which has also not lasted in effectiveness throughout the generation. So today, we'll see if this pair of swines can outdo their ancestors in preservation. Let's get into the festive spirit by asking how good were Piloswine and Mamoswine actually? And in this video, we'll be covering these competitive formats. In its debut generation, Piloswine was not exactly a metagame superstar. In the old days, the set was an ineffective attempt at a Curse Sweeper with Blizzard for Skarmory and Zapdos, and Roar for Curse Snorlax. However, eventually it was discovered to have quite the usable defensive niche that could respond offensively for the interested trainer. This niche was not just usable, but actually good, meaning you could bring one to a tournament battle and not be crippling yourself doing so. Its qualities are unique, useful, and compressed nicely to form a Pokemon that can assist greatly in holding off some of GSC's toughest threats. It's not just about its resistances though. Other than the useless poison resist, the electric immunity is enormous of course, but it's more about what it's neutral to. Being neutral to ice and ground is extremely useful. Steelix is the latter, but he struggles to stay healthy with spikes down and repeated hits, and tends to only be able to hurt Zapdos by exploding. And Steelix is also weak to ground. While Piloswine isn't packing explosion or a normal resist, which are great traits, Piloswine is able to check electrics, Gengar, and Nidoking rather effortlessly, all in one slot. All while dishing out an Earthquake stronger than Nidoking or Steelix's, so that Snorlax has to be wary about dealing with it. The set is Ice Beam, Earthquake, Rest, and Sleep Talk, and it will always get a good Sleep Talk against Nidoking, and 66% of the time, it will against the Electrics or Gengar. Many offensive teams don't feel comfortable switching into this combination of stabs once Cloyster goes down, and Cloyster sees a ton of early game action, so it's not just something to account for, it's almost expected. Pilo is not a staple of the metagame by any means, but this is an incredible defensive niche that deserves more recognition. Being able to counter so many of those dangerous Pokemon so well and in one slot is absolutely amazing, and an incredible boon for fitting defensive coverage on teams while still maintaining some offense. Piloswine's sadly pretty forgettable in the third generation. Resting is far more dangerous in this generation, and thus status from Zapdos and Gengar totally ruins it. Plus, without the max EV investment of GSC, it's not very bulky at all. And when you add to the fact that Zapdos and Gengar often use grass moves and Gengar now has Levitate, so it's not even affected by Earthquake, Piloswine's niche in countering them completely disappears. It checks Raikou and Jolteon decently, but so do better Pokemon while being more useful overall. There's also, of course, the issue of Skarmory stacking multiple spikes on it and whirlwinding it around to high heaven. It wasn't too usable and underused either, since it got overwhelmed by the big hitters such as Kangaskhan and Almastar, and struggled to harm common Pokemon such as Lunatone. And thus, sadly, Piloswine fell to never use. There, it can effectively use Choice Band, and while I'd love to have the stab, rock slide, and normal resistance of its main competition, Golem, it's still incredibly tough to one-hit KO, threatens a ton, isn't 4 times weak to anything, and is not ground weak, giving it something to separate itself with. It can also run a solid Toxic plus Protect set, which is very effective at spreading poison, seeing as Earthquake shatters poisons and steals, and racking up opposing damage and leftovers recovery with Protect. Now, granted, it's still in advanced never use, but it's nice that Piloswine was able to find a niche somewhere in the third generation. In the fourth generation, Piloswine evolved into the mighty Mamoswine, going from a decent 100 attack to a monstrous 130, and the physical and special split let it use ice moves from its attack stat. And with all of this, it was finally ready for a real overused role, and it remained there throughout the whole generation. Ice Shard is an incredible priority move, and with the new Garchomp, it was incredibly valuable, especially as Mamoswine was stronger and had greater longevity and bulk than its fellow Sharder Weavile, since its half-ground typing blessed it with a neutrality to Stealth Rock. It didn't enjoy new Pokemon such as Bronzong and Cresselia at all, but it could also set up Stealth Rock, giving some depth to its use. Skarmory's tendency to use physical defense EVs also meant that sometimes Mammal donned Blizzard, which, when equipped with Life Orb, would blow through Skarmory. Eventually, Garchomp was banned though, but the power of Salamence meant Mammal was always valuable. Then Platinum came around. Salamence got outraged and thus became even more powerful, but with that, Mamoswine got got Superpower, giving it a move to smash Bronzong with. Unfortunately, the additions of the Rotom appliances gave Mamoswine another wall as well, so it was a give and take. But Shaman Sky was also released with Platinum, which is another 4 times weak target for Mamoswine's Ice Shard. Now Shaman Sky was eventually banned on the account of being ridiculously overpowered, but it continued with the trend that Mamoswine was the Pokemon capable of keeping some of the most powerful Pokemon around in check. This continued even when Latias was unbanned, especially as Scarf Flygon became one of the metagame's biggest Pokemon. This meant that Skarmory started to run enormous amounts of special defense, and thus Blizzard Mammal was useless. But that wasn't too big of a deal, since it has a best friend in Magnezone who takes care of Skarmory, which contributed to the Leftovers versus Shed Shell dynamic Skarmory had. With Leftovers, it'd be zone prone, but with Shed Shell, it struggled to check the behemoths it was tasked with. Mamoswine also contributed to another fascinating segment of DPP, the lead metagame, where it showed that its anti-metagame ability was not limited to picking things off with Ice Shard. With a monstrous Earthquake that would cleave through even Metagross's high defense and Heatran's Shuka Berry, it was a very capable lead that would scare off these very scary leads, while Ice Shard would easily take care of Aerodactyl leads. And it would, of course, scare Dragonite to death once Heart Gold and Soul Silver came around and granted Dragonite extreme speed, which made it a very popular lead. Mammal could also set up Stealth Rock against most, and with Focus Sash, it could take a hit and endeavor the opponent to 1 HP, and potentially finishing them off with Ice Shard. Eventually, Latias' Salamence were banned, but despite that, Mamoswine remained useful with its Titanic strength, since its targets merely shifted to Pokemon like Shaman, Zapdos, and Dragonite, while Scarf Flygon was as popular as ever, if not more. Overall, Mamoswine was one of the best Pokemon added to the Diamond and Pearl metagame. And lo and behold, we actually have some Gen 4 VGC to talk about. In VGC 2009, Mamoswine made a splash. It was decently popular alongside Zapdos so that they could freely use their spread moves such as Earthquake and Discharge without affecting each other. This is of course called Disquake, although Garchomp was the much preferred Earthquake user for this. But priority Ice Shard was always valuable, especially when Garchomp was everywhere during this meta. But unfortunately, we don't have too many numbers from back then, but notably Alakapip used the combination of Mamoswine and Zapdos to win at Dallas and reach top 8 at the US Nationals. And Mamoswine showed itself to be an earth-shattering monster even in this metagame. Now on to Black and White. With so many new dragons popping up, Mamoswine's anti-metagame niche increased even further with so many new victims for its Ice Shard. Not just dragons, but the genies as well. And it finally gained a powerful tool for potentially dealing with weakened or specially defensive Skarmory. A real Ice Stab move in Icicle Crash, which comes with the benefit of a nasty flinch rate. Many teams were completely unable to switch into it, and even with the new Rotom Wash being able to resist both of its stabs, it still did not enjoy the sheer power of Icicle Crash more than once, and it had the stuff knocked out of it by Superpower, which also made quick work of Ferrothorn, everyone's de facto check to everything. Not that it enjoyed switching into stabs, but in a one-on-one situation, this could make or break a game. Superpower was also nice for Balloon Heatran. Mamoswine even gained a useful ability in Thick Fat, so it resisted ice and became neutral to fire, or even became resistant to fire in rain, which is not something that really changed its game-to-game performance, but it's something that could potentially save a game. For example, being able to switch into a Heatran Fire Blast and survive. Mamoswine's shown on all sorts of teams, ranging from sand to rain to weatherless, but it was most well known for a specific kind of weatherless team, Dragmag. As the name suggests, this kind of team revolved around Magnezone's Magnapole, helping it remove steel types, the only type that resisted dragon, so that the dragons could go crazy. Mamoswine was excellent here because not only did it enjoy the removal of the worst steel to face, Skarmory, so that it could really terrorize the opposing team, but because its no-nonsense Ice Shard would cut through even the fastest dragon. It could also set up Stealth Rock, and this combination of utility made it almost as essential as the dragons and Mamoswine. Throughout the generation, it had, pardon the pun, a mammoth presence. Upon seeing it in team preview, you'd always groan, knowing you'd have to do a merry little dance every time it hit the field, lest it pick your team apart, and knowing that as long as it was still alive, your Garchomp was not doing any sweeping. So yeah, Mamoswine is amazing in this generation. Now on to Gen 5 VGC, Mamoswine tended to use Ice Gem for mega powerful Ice Shards that slammed Thundurus in one hit, and alternatively, Life Orb to also have brutal Earthquakes or Focus Sash to take a hit, which was especially useful against rain. It again paired with non-grounded electrics like Rotom Wash and Fan, and Zapdos and Thundurus for spammable Earthquake, and could also partake in the weather metagame by using Snow Cloak alongside Abomasnow for an evasion boost. Its placings are very numerous across 2012 to 2013, so we're gonna stick to top 8s here. Here we go, and I apologize for butchering anyone's name. In 2012, Zach Droekamp, aka Bravurius, won the Madison Regionals with a Mamoswine that he amazingly forgot to put EVs on. Jonathan Hiller reached second at the US Nationals in the seniors division with it. Then in 2013, Jonathan used one again to win the Virginia Regionals, again in the seniors division, and Zach reached third at Madison this time around. Sam Harzma reached 7th at the Fort Wayne Regionals, and Jacob P reached 7th at the US Nationals in the seniors division. Ben Kilby got first at the Australian Nationals with one, but of course, the most famous placement though is the world's winning Mamoswine used by Arash Omadi, aka Mean. It was not one of the traditional variants we were used to, but instead a Choice Scarf variant that tore through the faster, frailer Pokemon in the metagame. And with the genies popping up everywhere this time around, it was especially good at ripping them apart without a hitch. So having such a viciously powerful trump card against them was an incredible weapon. In fact, this Mamoswine was such a huge deal that this Pokemon, shiny and all, was distributed as an event wonder card at events in Bochum, Germany, Manchester, England, Milan, Italy, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Melbourne, Australia. Good stuff to Arash Omadi for achieving that, for winning Worlds 2013, and also to our Tusk friend for having a crowning moment of glory in VGC 2013. Now on to Gen 6. Fairies causing dragons to go down meant Mamoswine's talents were not as explicitly needed, as well as the existence of Keldeo and megas such as the Charizards and Scizor. But Mamoswine still remained a solid threat. Its Ice Shard was huge during the early reign of Thundurus, and its Earthquake was so powerful, it was one of the few things that could threaten to one-hit KO Aegislash. It was a good stealth rocker considering that the Laddie twins were very common defoggers, as was even Mandibuzz for a time, and they obviously didn't want anything to do with Mamoswine. Putting aside Stealth Rock, it could also use the buffed knockoff to mess with a Rotom-Wash's leftovers and generally cripple anything that wasn't named Mega Scizor, who is of course prone to Magnezone, just like Skarmory. It could even use Freeze Dry to surprise Rotom-Wash with a big hit that leave it in range for something else such as Talonflame. Now this combination was actually quite popular for a time, but eventually overall Mamoswine started getting phased out after Oraz's early period, but it's definitely not a bad Pokemon. In fact, one could call it underrated or slept on, that kind of thing. It's absolutely got potential. It's just people tend to be wary of letting in Keldeo, and being forced into ice moves can be an unfortunate way of letting that happen without making much progress. And Mega Slowbro, now just Mega, as regular can be crippled quite hard by knockoff, can also give it trouble, but there are tools around it. Now unfortunately for Mamoswine, it actually dropped to underused, but there it was an absolute monster. Being able to tear through important Pokemon such as Mega Aerodactyl, Chestnut, and Snorlax was no mean feat. While its speed and weaknesses could hamper it against Pokemon like Cobalion, Suicune, and Infernape, its benefits were enormous, especially as knockoff now slaughtered Bronzong thanks to the Steel nerf against Dark. Now on to VGC, Mamoswine continued to do typical Mamoswine things. Its old prey such as Garchomp and Salamence was always prevalent, and the new generation came with many new victims such as Mega Mawile and Aegislash, as well as Mega Salamence in 2015. In 2014, it had many regional placements, but for the sake of length, we've kept it limited to only the highest ones, which included Julio Fernandez reaching top 3 with one at the Querétaro Premier Challenge, packing Rock Slide for Talonflame and Mega Charizard Y. There's also Daniel Fao winning the Argentinian Premier Challenge with it, using an unconventional team with Lapras and Metal Burst Rhydon. At Nationals, Gavin Michaels, aka King of Mars, brought one and reached top 8 at Worlds, and finally, at Worlds, Ryosuke Kosuge impressively reached 5th with it. This further cemented Mamoswine's place as a great Pokemon in the VGC metagame. Then in 2015, Mamoswine dropped off a decent bit, although it was still used here and there. Guanyang Ze won the Singapore Asia Cup qualifier with Scarf Mamoswine, and Wesley Worth Anderson reached top 4 at the Washington Spring Regionals with one. However, its usage was far more sporadic, and eventually it pretty much didn't show up at all at Nationals or Worlds, at least in notable placements. Now on to Gen 7, Mamoswine has potential in overuse, but hasn't really been seen. It's understandable given the plethora of flashy options available, but it's also got its flaws. Bear in mind there's the Keldeo dilemma of Oraz, but nowadays replace that with Greninja, and unfortunately there's also grassy terrain that weakens its Earthquake, and psychic terrain that blocks its Ice Shards. However, when the common Pokemon include Tapu Bulu, Tangrowth, Heatran, Zygarde, Magearna, Tapu Koko, Landorus Therian, Tornadus Therian, Mega Latios, Mega Latias, Gliscor, and Garchomp, the metagame's just waiting to be ravaged by Mamoswine. It can even cripple Celesteela with knockoff or a powerful Icicle Crash. Now maybe one day in the future we'll see Mamo ripping things apart, since the potential is certainly there, but as it is, it remains an underuse. Where there, it's tremendous, shredding every Mega Pidgeot, Mega Altaria, Crocodile, Latias, Mega Aerodactyl, Komodo, Mega Manectric, and Hydreigon in its path, in addition to blowing through defensive Pokemon like nobody's business. It doesn't even need a Z move since Life Orb is all it requires to crush whatever it's faced with. It faces the same issues of its speed and weaknesses hindering it against monsters such as fellow Ice-type Kyurem, but it's still a massive threat that dishes out equally massive pain against the whole metagame. And unfortunately, for the first time in VGC, Mamoswine didn't place at all. New Pokemon such as Kartana, Tapu Fini, Arcanine, and Celesteela give it a lot of grief, and grassy terrain weakening its earthquakes also didn't help. So with that, it was unfortunately overshadowed. And that's it. So how good were Piloswine and Mamoswine? Actually, Piloswine was underrated at first, but wholly unspectacular, especially in the 3rd generation. However, ever since it evolved into Mamoswine, it's been an absolute wrecking ball. It's consistently been a Pokemon that dishes out huge damage to nearly everything thanks to its terrific stab combination, and even more notably, feasts on the best Pokemon in the metagame, the ones most everyone else is afraid of, but to Mamoswine, they're just victims. In VGC, despite eventually dropping off, it was a terrifying force in the previous 3 generations. Overall, the term mammoth is right, and Pokemon's answer to the swine flu is equally scary. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you guys all have a Merry Christmas, or if you don't celebrate Christmas, have a Happy Holidays, or whatever it is you do during this time of year. Shout outs to the patrons for continued support of our videos, and shout outs to all of you watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms, yada yada yada. And that's all I got. Happy holidays, hope you all have a happy new year, etc., etc. And we'll see you next time.